Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Wristwatch check. I'm wearing my Junghans chronoscope. It's the limited edition because it's factory sapphire crystal. You could get the sapphire crystal ordered, but they normally have them with the plastic crystal at the store at retail. But they called this the SC series for sapphire crystal, and they put a number lot on them. They issued only 200 of them, so limited edition because it's got a sapphire crystal. We'll do a whole episode, I think, on marketing stuff that the watch people do. But today we're going to talk about time graphers. Before I start, if you've ever looked at my only non-monetized show, it's the one where I talk about this erotic pocket watch from the 1920s. Okay, you can't really see it because it's actually quite graphic, and it moves. And so since it moves, instead of just keeping it in a glass case, because if it was a static image, I could get away with letting it run down and then just keep it in a glass case as an object. But since it is a functioning watch with a very interesting, shall we say, running indicator, it's worth keeping up, maintaining. And so I had it serviced recently, and I just got it back. I sent the quarter repeater off again because it was working fine, but of course I overshowed it, and one time opening up the back, I hooked one of the gongs, and so now he has to repair the gong. But it's been repaired. The gong is not well placed in regards to the lid. But then again, considering it was one of the first repeater patents ever issued, 1899, I can't complain. And it's totally worth, again, in the case of that watch, it's totally worth maintaining because it's a repeater. But it's in great shape, and the watchmaker is going to take good care of it. But that's the thing about maintaining watches, and that leads us directly into our topic of time graphers. Because why do you need a time grapher? Oh, Hannes, how's it going, my friend? You're wearing your San Martin Submariner homage. Yeah, that is a good watch. It really is. San Martin really, they're doing a good job of homages. And that's why I always say, buy an homage. If you want to buy a fake, buy an homage. Because the homages have the manufacturer's name on them, and they have to then stand up to that manufacturer's standards. So whether it's something relatively cheap, and I won't use a name to talk about cheap because nobody would like that, to something very good like San Martin or Steinhardt, which are both great homages. The Steinhardt Explorer 2 homages are awesome. San Martin makes some great pieces and a good choice. And like I said, an homage is always better than a fake. Or super clone. I had a friend who recently purchased a super clone, and I told him it's a fake. And he goes, no, it's a super clone, which is just a fancy word for high speed fake, I guess. I mean, it's still not a real Rolex, right? And speaking of Rolexes, after a lot of thought back and forth, I did sell my Datejust, so now I am Rolex less. But with the current situation of just the pricing and all, I had been on the fence and love-hate relationship with Rolex from day one, and I still like the brand. And I'm on the wait list for an Air King, and if I got my hands on an Air King, I would keep it. But the Datejust is a little bit too flashy. The Air King is not a very liked Rolex outside of collectors. So that one I would run the risk of wearing in public, because I mean, I'll be honest, I'm a big guy, but I'm getting old, and I don't want to have to worry about running from or fighting with people trying to take my watch. And so I would rather wear something less expensive. But then again, I mean, this is a 15, actually it's a 2000. I managed to get it for 15. And I've got pieces in my collection that I'm not going to get rid of that are still worth 6,000 and 8,000. But 6 and 8 is a lot big difference between 6 and 8 and 10 and 15. And, that's what Rolex is rolled with. And everyone knows that. See, and that's the problem. I mean, If someone looks at, say, for example, this JLC Polaris, nice looking watch, but unless you know watches, you don't realize what's here. And I like that. I prefer that, frankly. I wear watches because I wear watches because they're interesting, and because they have stories to tell, and sometimes they have a parlor trick like the erotic watch, or just a nice looking chrono. Because a chrono, in one sense, is additional complications beyond telling the time is what I call a parlor trick. A chrono is not a very flashy parlor trick. You're not going to catch any eyes, on the street saying, "Hey, look at this stopwatch in here." But if you had, say, for example, a repeating watch and you were in the bar and you played it, even someone who's not into watches would pay attention. A nice complication can make a watch a beautiful moon phase. Like if you think about the Meister singers, they're not just an accurate moon phase, it's a big, beautiful moon phase on that watch. And it's not a parlor trick in the sense that showing it off in that sense. But if someone looks at that watch, they can appreciate the beauty that it represents. And that's the kind of thing that I mean. It doesn't have to have bells and whistles, but it has to have something that catches the attention, the eye, the aesthetic sense of watch collecting, or at least watch admiring. Because you can be a car person and never have the money for a Ferrari, but you still consider yourself a car person. And watches are like that. You don't have to own a Patek Philippe to admire and know about Patek Philippe. It's not like, hero admiration or anything. You're just learning about all of the available devices in your hobby range, as it were. Jonathan Robinson, how's it going? Hey, New Jersey. I'm going to be in New York in June for a few days. We should definitely hook up. Ping me and I'll send you my phone number. Let's hope to get my Air King, a complete understatement. Exactly. And it's not comically expensive. So I'm on the waiting list. Let's see what happens. Maybe it'll happen, maybe not. Because unfortunately, wait lists, as we know, are almost imaginary anyway. And a real wait list would be several hundred names long. Which means you're still looking at a couple of watches per dealer per year of that model. It's going to be a long time before I get the call. I may not want the call by the time I get the call. Frankly, if I had my druthers, which is very tempting, I would sell the three-hander Polaris and I would buy the Polaris chronograph. So I would actually be maintaining the same essential look. I think I would get the chrono on the metal bracelet, but I would rather have the Polaris chronograph than Rolex, any Rolex, even the Daytona, because like I said, they're really nice watches, and part of it is, it makes you a target. If in a perfect world where nobody had to worry about it, I wouldn't have sold my Rolex, but part of the reason I sold it, and also selling my Rolex made my collection significantly less attractive to thieves. All of my pieces would take you 3 months and a client list to sell. You're not not too many people rushing out to get their hands on a Junghans or even a JLC three-hander Polaris. They retail for what, $8 and change with the leather strap. But that's still a lot less than a Rolex, and I personally think that the JLC is a better watch. The movement is much more highly finished. In fact, I'm going to put the JLC on the timegrapher. I'm going to be holding it up for the camera, so it may not be very accurate, but you get an opportunity to see what a really nice piece the JLC is, because I've had it for several years and I haven't had it serviced yet, and it's still running well. The amplitude is still in the 270s. And that's one of the things that we'll talk about as I explain the timegrapher, right? So this is a timegrapher. It's got, power connections, and it has a microphone connection, a balanced connection, in other words, plus minus and ground, which this microphone here uses a 3-pin plug. So because at the other end of that cable is a very sensitive microphone. This is a microphone. This stand is a microphone. And it listens to the watch. And because it knows what the sounds mean, it tells you what the watch is doing inside. So it's like a diagnostic device. Well, it's not like a diagnostic device. It is a diagnostic device for your watch. And it can be put into different positions, which is when you hear people saying, a watch has been tested to XYZ positions. Well, they use a much more sophisticated device than this, but this can test a watch in different angles because when it's vertical, gravity impacts the way the balance wheel and the gearing works. And when it's horizontal, gravity doesn't affect it as much. And and in the case of a watch anyway, you're swinging your arm and you're moving it constantly. So the more positions you can test a watch to ensure that, they call it the delta, because in every position, the watch is going to have a different performance. And so the watchmaker tries to get that delta, that average, to be as tight as possible when they adjust the watch. Now, I'm not going to talk about using the timegrapher to adjust a watch. That would be a completely different episode. And frankly, that would probably be better with a pre-recorded, because then I would take a beat up old watch and put it on the timegrapher and push it with a toothpick and show you how you can regulate it. But today we're going to talk about why you should just simply own one, even if you just own one watch. Hector, how's it going, Hector? Hector Avilene, greetings from NYC. Hey, we should all get together and have beers when I'm in New York. Ping me and I'll send you my phone number. Longines Spirit Zulu Time. That's a great piece. I had one. I just sold it to a good friend of mine. There's a good review of it in the archive. I think it's a fantastic watch. And this is a man who owns a couple of Breitlings, and he bought my Speed Sonic Lobster. So he's got a decent collection, but he's wearing the Longines as his daily wear. And the Zulu Time is a perfect daily wear watch. It looks great. It's rugged. It has a good function in the second time zone. It's a quick release bracelet. So you can, in his case, he has the leather and the metal. And you can swap them like nothing. It's a great daily wear. I endorse it highly. Good choice. So you clip the watch into the stand, and the timegrapher listens to it tick and tells you what's going on inside. Right. So here, let's take this timegrapher, right, and I'll hold it up. Right. And so I'm going to put the watch down because I don't have three hands, and just assume that the watch is here ticking away, because it is. And so now let's hold it up. Comes on. It says auto beat detect. It could be because maybe the camera won't pick it up because it's polarized light. Yeah, I'm not getting too much of an image on here, so we'll leave it be, but you can hear it ticking away. And it has rate, amplitude, beat error, and then it has another space that says parameters, right? And you don't need to see exactly what it says on the screen because the items are luckily printed on the dial. But just so you would know, this Polaris is running +1 second, 0 seconds, +1 second a day. And that's assuming that if it doesn't change position, that's what's going to happen. But obviously it's sitting horizontally, so that's its horizontal beat rate. And then you would measure it vertically. So let me turn it vertical just for the heck of it, right? So we turned it vertical, and I'm getting -1 second now. So it's actually running really, really tight to spec at -1, +1, +1, -1. Now, the amplitude, on this watch, the amplitude was 270. Vertically, it was 261, which is good, but not great. You want the amplitude to be at least 270. And this is like right on 270 amplitude, right? So the amplitude is literally how much power is in the tick, as it were, because it's how far back and forth the balance wheel goes. I'm going to turn this off. You don't need to hear this thing ticking away. But so I can hold it up better. I'll just disconnect all of this. All right. So it says, rate, amplitude, beat, error, and parameters. So the amplitude, like I said, is how far back and forth the balance wheel's going, and that's why it's measured in degrees. So 270 degrees back and forth is about, on a vintage watch, 250. Anything, as long as you're over 250, you're in good shape. You want to be preferably over 270, and a good modern watch can be over 300. Obviously, it can't be 360 because that's a complete spin of the wheel. But you can see a watch with 310 degrees of amplitude, a good new watch. So the amplitude is something I'll come back to later, because that's one of the things you want to use a timegrapher for when you're just checking the watch to make sure that it's running well. The beat error, right, on the watch is how big a difference between when it ticks one way and ticks the other. And that beat error is measured in milliseconds. And so most watches can be regulated to around a tenth of a millisecond. With some wear, a lot of watches are going to be in the 3 to 5 millisecond beat error range. But if you're running more than a millisecond of beat error, that watch needs to be regulated. You should at least have somebody take a look at it. And it would probably be repaired with poor amplitude and bad timekeeping as well, because all of those issues are related. But so the beat error is how much of a difference between the tick and the tock, as it were. How off is the watch in its ticking regularity. And then the parameters, right? The parameters, that's going to tell you, it flips back and forth between two numbers. Well, this one does. Some have different windows for that information. But on this is, this multifunction timegrapher you could pick up on Amazon very easily. I just picked mine up on Amazon. So I'm assuming most of you will just go out and get something like this, because this is perfectly adequate for the job. So the parameters portion of it flips back and forth between two pieces of information. The beats per hour, right? So it'll tell you how many beats per hour. So a 10 beat, a high beat watch would be 36,000. An 8 beat would be 28,000 and change. And I can't remember the beat per hour for 5 hertz and 4 hertz. For 3 hertz and 5 beat, 2.5 hertz watches like Omegas and some other pieces out there. But the beat, obviously, if you don't know how many times your watch ticks a second, it'll tell you. Or I should say an hour, and then you do the math and divide. Oh, hey, how's it going, Neil? Neil Bailey, glad to see you here, my friend. And Hannes, round about 180, 200 euros. Yeah, exactly. That's a really good price for a nice homage. And because their name is on it, people know San Martin makes good watches. And that's the thing about an homage. The company's name, the maker's name is still on it. So they take pride in their work, like Steinhardt or San Martin. Or there are a bunch of good clone companies out there. Not clone, homage companies out there, but I'm not going to name them all. But San Martin's a great one. And it's a really good value for the money. It really is. So let's see. Do they cost a lot? No, you can get a timegrapher for about $200, give or take. I bought this, like I said, I got it on Amazon for, I think I paid $212 or something like that for it. And it comes with, comes with a little power cord, comes with the microphone stand, and then you're off and running. Because even if you never adjust your watch, even if you never decide to play with it, never decide to regulate it, even if you only own one watch, a timegrapher will do one important thing. It will give you peace of mind about the piece. Like this one, not this one, this one, my JLC Polaris. I was worried about it because occasionally when you set it, the hand jumps. And I'm thinking, I might need some work, but then that's a different issue than running. But I thought, well, if as long as it's running well, I'll leave it alone because I don't set it that often because I only set it when I wear it. And I don't wear it that often because I have so many pieces. But I do want to make sure that it's running well. And I want to make sure that if it does need service, I take it in when it needs service at the right time. I don't want to take it in too early because that wastes money, but I don't want to take it in too late either because that wastes money because then there's more wrong with it than what would have been wrong with it, right? So if all you do with a timegrapher is look at the amplitude, you're golden. The rate, of course, is self-evident. If it's telling you that it's running 30 seconds slow a day and it's a Rolex, it needs service. I did a before after. No, actually, I have to do a before after because I did the Rolex on a timegrapher, and then I realized it needed service, sent it out for service, got it back, and I put it back on the timegrapher, and now it's running on rails. I got to do I might have done it before after. I have to check my archive, but if I haven't, I will will show you a before and after timegrapher shot on a watch before it was serviced and after it was serviced. It does make a big difference in how the watch runs because that's what this does. This provides a deep and intimate view into the watch functionality, and that brings me to the last bit of information that pops up as the alternate information from Beats on this timegrapher. At least, like I said, some timegraphers it gives it as a separate number, and that is what they call the lift angle. And the lift angle is literally the amount of time that the pallet fork is being pushed by the balance wheel pin. So as the balance wheel is going back and forth and the pallet fork is going tick-tock back and forth, the amount of time that pallet fork end is in contact with the balance wheel pin, that's the lift angle. And to find that, you need a lot of time, and you need to be a good watchmaker, and you need a camera that you can do it with a cell phone camera and slow down. But you have to really know what you're doing to adjust the lift angle. It's one of the arms on, if you see a non-free sprung balanced watch and it has those two arms, one is to adjust the length of the hairspring and the other is to adjust the lift angle of the watch to ensure that it's operating within parameters. And that's something that you're not going to really be able to impact. And that's something that really you'll see problems with that in the amplitude. So you don't have to really worry about that number, but I just wanted to explain that number so you don't look at it and go, why is it giving me that number? So you see it all. But 80% of the information on a timegrapher is more useful to a watchmaker. But as long as you keep an eye on the first two numbers, your rate and your amplitude, you'll then have an idea of how well the watch is performing. So when the amplitude drops below, say, 250, you're running 230 amplitude, you should start thinking about in the next few months taking it into a watchmaker. And then since you know in advance that it's starting to slow down, and it's not because of mechanical serious issues, it's almost certainly at that point because of the lubricants drying up and caking and microparticles getting caught up in the lubricants and gumming them up. So once you start seeing the amplitude go down, especially if you see it go down in a dramatic rate, you measure it and it's 270 this week, next week it's 230, the week after it's 165, run to your local watchmaker. There's something got in it, and maybe not water, or else you'd see condensation inside, but something's in that watch and it's causing you some serious issues, and you don't take it in immediately, you'll be in trouble. Like in the case of my Rolex, which is why I also felt comfortable selling it, because once it was serviced, it had also a year guarantee on it from the watchmaker. So I was able to sell it with a year guarantee. It had an amplitude under 200 and it was off by like 30 seconds, which, like I said, for a Rolex is comically slow. And it turns out it was, a closet. I mean, a safe warrior, safe queen. The person bought it and never, ever, ever, ever wore it. And so when he sold it to the watchmaker checked it out at the time. It worked. It ran well on the watch timegrapher, or maybe he didn't even put it on a timegrapher. He probably wore it for a little bit, and then I wore it for a bit, and just that little bit of wearing, we had to replace two winding wheels, the two winding gears in the watch. So maintenance too late can cost you a lot of money. I lucked out because my watch, I do a lot of business with this watchmaker, and so he passed the cost on to me without a markup on the parts. I only paid him for labor, and the base cost for the parts. But I could have saved myself 300 euros by just if I had immediately after buying it, well, it probably would have already been running poorly by the time I first wore it, but it was my wearing it with dry lubricant that caused the problem. So if I had tested it immediately after I bought it, it would have probably shown me halfway decent numbers. But when I tested it a few months into the ownership, I realized it needed service badly. And so I took it in, and I had, significant work was done to it, but now it's running within, I think it's doing 0+1 a day right now. So it's within Rolex parameters again, which are ±2. So a timegrapher lets you pay attention to what's happening in the watch. And the moment it starts to deviate is when you should start thinking about having it serviced. So that's the issue with a timegrapher, is it gives you the peace of mind of knowing that you know exactly what's going on with your pieces, and if you should take something in and when you should take something in. Because like I said, you take it in too early, wastes some money. And if you take it in too late, it wastes money. And if you have a timegrapher, you can really evaluate, really understand the watch, and the more you understand about how the watch functions, why amplitude is important. Even if you can't adjust the lift angle, what it is, what it represents is it's the arc of angle within the motion of the balance wheel that's imparting energy to the escapement, as it were. These are all very important parameters for the watch. You don't have to worry about most of them because you can't adjust them. But like I said, if you just keep your eye on the rate and the amplitude, you'll have a very healthy understanding of the performance of your watches. And if you look into the other aspects and other parameters, you could start fiddling with your watches yourself. Like I said, you could. I will do a pre-recorded, because I can't do that live, but I'll do a pre-recorded episode in a week or two where I'll get my hands on something old or something I don't need right now, or because I don't want to stick my fingers in anything really expensive, because if I make a mistake, I slip or sneeze, I could be damaging thousands of euros worth of watch. So opening up a watch and playing with it is not for the weak-hearted, and not for those who don't know what they're doing. And I barely know what I'm doing. So I'm actually going to take one of those watch classes in Glashütte soon. I got to wait till I have some time free that I can take that kind of time away from work. But, taking like a $60 Vostok and playing with regulation, like I did that to one of my Vostoks in the past. I just picked up a Polyot, a very good friend of mine who was on the team that took apart the MiG-29 that defected to the West, gave me a MiG-29 Polyot chronograph. I'm so pleased. And so I'll use that watch because it could use some regulation. So I'll put it on the timegrapher, and we'll do an episode, and I'll explain how to, like I said, I'm not a watchmaker. And so don't try this at home, folks, unless you really want to. But yeah, you can take a toothpick and you can adjust the speed of your watch if you have a steady hand, guts of steel, and a timegrapher. So, but like I said, if all you're using the timegrapher for is just to monitor the health of your watches, it's a worthwhile investment. It really is. It's totally worth the money. Unless the watch is worth less than $200, then you can just buy another watch for the cost of the timegrapher. But if you have a piece that costs more, I would say the time to start thinking about it is any watch that you would even think of servicing. So for me, that would be any watch over the $1,000 price point. There's some watches in the $600-700 price point. The range. You get some people don't like price point, but price point is in price categories, right? like a Tissot PRX Powermatic 80. I would take that to have serviced, even though it's a $700 watch, $800 watch. I would take that in to have a service because it's a mechanical movement, and mechanical movements are good and robust. I mean, I would take a Vostok in if I really wanted to keep put it in top running shape. But then the watchmaker's not going to charge me an arm and a leg to dial in my Vostok, or I don't have the Vostok anymore, or to dial in my Polyot. There's a base cost for labor, but depending on the watch, it could cost more because number one, the parts are more expensive, and number two, the procedures are more delicate. You make a mistake with it costs money, so you take your time, and time costs money. But like I said, if you have a timegrapher and you notice the amplitude starting to go down, you should start saving up your money, because that's the other thing, is that with a timegrapher, you start seeing some irregularities in performance. Oh, I'm going to need to service this in the near future. So you start, ponying up your war chest. And so that way, when you go to the watchmaker and they go, well, this could run $500 to $700, you can say, please save my child, doctor. Neil. Hannes, roundabout. Okay. I'm sorry, Hannes. You were answering Neil's question about how much the timegrapher cost, not how much your San Martin cost. But that's okay. I occasionally make, the mistake. Well, I make lots of mistakes, but I've just made one in that case, so I apologize. But yeah, you're right. They're right. That's what I just said, about $200 or so. They're really, it's really worth the money. It really, like I said, if you have a watch you're planning on servicing, and the service costs on that watch are more than $200, buy a timegrapher. X201T says 1820. Okay, 1800 is 3 beats. 21.6 is guessing 4 or 3.5 or whatever. 25 would probably be 5. 28 is 8 beats. 36 is 10. Thank you. I learned so much. Well, I mean, stuff you can look up, but it's nice to have a community of people that volunteer information. We can all enjoy, keep the conversation going and learn. Hannes, besides using the timegrapher for checking the health of a watch, I would also use it to know how I need to rest my watch overnight to keep it as close as possible to 0 seconds a day. That is an excellent, I didn't even think of that, because I keep my stuff, in the case so I can put it in the safe easy. But you're absolutely right. You could just have a case. Well, then again, if you have one of those spinning gyroscopic winders, that would work too, I guess. But like in the case of my case, I can only put them in a certain position. But the watch you're wearing, for example, if it runs better vertically, senkrecht, as the Germans would say, you can then leave it on its side, when you put it on the night table, if you're going to wear it the next day. Or if it runs better on its back, you lay it on its back. If it runs better at an angle, you prop it up against something. Yeah, that's a good point, Hannes. I'm really, like I said, you have this beautiful community, and we all have these wonderful conversations, and we learn from one another. Because just determining the best position to store the watch in is a very good use of the timegrapher. Point for you, little gold star. Don't forget to wind the watch 100% before measuring. Well, it should be relatively high lap, 100%, 90, more than 80. It should be, you're right. It should be pretty high wound, because constant force, right? You want to make sure that the mainspring force is at its highest. But then again, it doesn't hurt to test it when the mainspring is low, but then you'd have to almost know how low it is, so if it's worthwhile information. Maybe you let it run down and then wind it, say, 3 times, or as whatever the minimum amount of it is to get it to run, and then test it again. Give you some information about the watch's parameters as the force diminishes. Well, that's why there are a lot of ways to try to address that, like a remontoir, which is just a little spring that the mainspring winds, and then the little spring is more consistent in its operation of the escapement. Or Gerard Perregaux has got that blade technology, which is just awesome. That's my Grail watch that I know I'll never get, because it's like $50,000 used. and it uses the snap of a silicon spring, a blade spring, a flat spring that's like 4 microns thick. I mean, it's insane. Well, once you start going into silicon watch parts, you're in the nanoscale manufacturing space. Check out my video on silicon parts and watches. I have some nice photographs that I shot when I was in the Swiss Microelectronics Research Association. CSEM is the Swiss name, the acronym for the organization. But yeah, I got a chance to see silicon parts in wafer and took pictures for the episode, so you can take a look at that. But this silicon blade, the snap of the blade is what drives the snap of the spring, like snapping a credit card, is what drives the escapement in that Girard-Perregaux constant force escapement. And because the snap of the spring drives the escapement, the mainspring can continue to drive the watch accurately until it runs literally almost completely out, because it's driving that snap, and in the snap is what drives the escapement. Another way is a Fuse chain, and that's where you have a little pyramid-shaped pulley with another pulley, and there's a little teeny chain, and so as the chain goes through the steps of the pulley, the various steps, it exerts different force. So it compensates for the loss of torque in the spring by the thickness of the pulley at certain extensions. So as it extends, it climbs the pulley and then goes back down. And as it does that, it's compensating for the force of the spring. So winding the watch completely will give you the most force for the escapement. But like I said, it might not hurt to play with what happens at the lower windings as well. So food for thought. Let's see. Ronan, how's it going, Ronan? Ronan Cullen? I finally got the Grand Seiko Shun Buns, 1 month old, and already scratched a lot on the bracelet. Hey, but if you own it to keep it, scratches are just character. You know, if you own it to keep it, it's yours. Those are the marks of a watch that you enjoy and you wear and you are having fun with. You know, nothing wrong with scratches. I mean, there are such things as unsightly scratches, but that falls to me more into accidental damage. Scratches, you know, a scratch big enough to be a problem falls into the category of damage that may need to be addressed by a watchmaker. But just normal wear and tear scratches, marks of pride. You're wearing your watch. It's not sitting in a safe gathering dust. You're enjoying it. You're having fun with it. Power to you. Let's see. Jonathan, ownership of a timegrapher makes sense if just for maintenance purposes. Exactly. Like I said, the moment you start seeing the watch start to drift out of performance norm, when you start, like I said, start saving money, and then at least you're not surprised by a repair bill or a service charge. You plan on taking it in. You know you have a window of time because it's only just started to act up. Like I said, if it shows accelerated poor operation, something seriously wrong with it. But if it goes from 270 amplitude to 250 amplitude, and then 3 months later it's still at 250 amplitude, that's probably just, well, it wouldn't jump so radically from 270 to 250, but you know what I mean. In other words, if it's slowing down, but it's not doing it at a radical pace, that gives you time to save up. It's probably just getting a little dirty, and the lubricants are getting a little greasy inside. And so you can plan 3 to 6 months, save the money up, and turn it in. So the timegrapher gives you that peace of mind, knowing that you're on top of what you're doing with the watch. So yeah, exactly. If for maintenance alone. And then it never hurts to, put the watch in. What I normally do is I put the watch in after I've worn it all day, and it's, warmed up, and it's running about as best as it's going to, because I've been moving around and all of that other good stuff. Then I'll throw it on the timegrapher sometimes when before I go to bed, and just to see how it's doing. Because if you make it a habit to just check on your watches on a regular basis, because that's what happened with the Rolex, is that I hadn't planned to test it. I was just in the habit of testing my watches once I got the timegrapher, and the Rolex fell into the rotation and wound up getting tested. And I shudder to think what would have happened if I let that watch run longer without proper servicing. It would have cost me a lot more, or it might have been irreparably damaged. You never know. You never know how badly. I mean, it's a mechanical device, so damage can cascade. A little problem. I mean, just think of something as just a piece of gear chipping off. That piece of gear could fall into another gear. It could just fall, into the bottom of the watch and not get caught in anything. You might luck out. But if something gets caught up inside of the watch, or let's say, for example, it's a 7750, Value 7750 base, and you're changing it between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., and then you definitely chip a gear, or you run a higher risk of chipping a gear, let's put it that way, or at least slipping a gear. And that kind of stuff can cause all kinds of problems. You can kick up secondary microparticles that can get caught up in the mechanism and all those things. So a timegrapher lets you see what's going on inside without having to open it up. And I mean, this isn't a laboratory precision calibrated device, but for our purposes, it doesn't have to be. Let the watchmaker have the expensive timegrapher. You just need one. It's like a modern car just says, check engine. A timegrapher is like having an old school car that has a voltmeter and an oil pressure gauge and an oil temperature gauge. So you know what's going on, and a tachometer. So you know what the engine speed is, you know what the oil temperature is, you know what the oil pressure is, and you know how the alternator's doing. That's a phenomenal amount of information to have. And there are companies that sell aftermarket kits, so you can stick a device on your dashboard that'll give that to you, because people like to have information about the things that they own, especially if it's a complicated device like a car or a watch. Because having that information, you can see the voltmeters dropping maybe, and you go and you clean your battery terminals, or you check your alternator connections or something. Could be something simple, could be something complicated. But that's the advantage of having a diagnostic tool that gives you a rough idea what's going on inside of that device. Hey, Malad, how's it going, my friend? Glad to see you here, Malad Sky. Hector, I'm not exactly sure how to pin you. Did you ever do an episode on winders? Hear conflicting points on them. I talk about winders in one of my accessory shows. Maybe we'll do an episode just about winders. A winder is a convenience thing. I've got winders, but I currently don't use them because I'm trying to save power, because I'm here in Germany, and electricity is expensive, and I know it doesn't pull a lot of power, but hey, every penny helps. But I can spin 8 watches on that case, and I used to, and I'll probably do it. Well, now that the summer's here and I don't need to worry about heat, I might spin up some and then keep my top, or at least spin 4 and keep my 4 most rotated. I'll probably spin 8 if I do that. The only problem there is that I currently keep my top 10 in a box that fits in my safe, so I can easily put it in and out when I leave the house for any purpose. And I keep my interesting pieces that don't cost too much in the case. So number one, it's a diversion. They may not even know there's a safe in the apartment. And 2, since they're the less expensive pieces, they're on display in there. But they're the interesting pieces, so they're actually more useful for the show aspect, the art aspect of a visible watch collection. But winders are not bad for your watch, but since the watch is always running, they keep you within your service intervals. Put it this way, if you have a winder, you should definitely have a timegrapher so you can keep an eye on the watch's performance. But the big criticism of a watch winder is that it keeps the watch running. Watch winders have timing devices in them. I have 2 different timing intervals that I can have on this one, for example. So you're not going to overwind the watch with a watch winder. And even if you do, unless you're doing it egregiously, You're not going to a modern watch, vintage watches, your mileage may vary, but a modern watch is a mechanism that'll prevent it from being overwhelmed. A modern automatic watch, the an automatic watch is going to be constantly winding as well. Don't forget, as long as you're wearing it, so it has to be protected against overwinding internally. So a modern watch, I wouldn't worry about it anyway. And in a vintage watch, like I said, you can adjust your timing intervals, the winding intervals on it. But then I wouldn't put a vintage watch in a winder anyway, because, like I said, it doesn't accelerate wear, but it maintains, the watch is running, so it's going to wear at its normal rate, even when you're not wearing it. And that's the big difference between, using a winder and not using a winder. But then again, if you leave the watch in a drawer for too long, the lubricants will all cake up and dry out. So I shouldn't say dry out, but they'll cake up and crumble out, and it won't work as well as it used to, like that Rolex that I bought and sold. So the winder is useful for keeping a watch in good running order, because the watch is always running when it's in a winder. You may not want it to run all the time, but then again, like I said, you can adjust the interval, or you can just put the winder on a switch and just have them run once a week for a few hours, just to make sure all the watches get a little bit of action. But there's no serious negative about a winder. The biggest problem with a winder is the watch is always running. And so you need to, think about service, because if it's always running, then eventually something's going to need to be addressed. But even if it's only running sometimes, eventually it's going to need to be addressed. So depending on how you wear it and how often you use it, a winder's not going to really shorten the lifetime of the watch significantly. It's not going to shorten the lifetime of the watch at all, because if you maintain a mechanical watch, it'll last almost indefinitely. But as far as like service intervals, a watch on a winder more times often than not is going to need a service interval, possibly more often than a watch that's not. But that watch that's not might need to have a service because the lubricants caked up in it because it wasn't worn. So, like I said, your mileage may vary, but winders are a convenience. They can be useful, but they're not directly bad for your watches. We've got about 10 minutes left in the show. Ronan, but doesn't a Rolex service be the same price if it needs replaced parts in the actual movement? A standard Rolex service price is the same regardless if it needs new movement parts. That hasn't been my experience. They're not just going to replace parts for free. Unless whoever you're servicing it with is giving a blanket price. I paid 1,700 euros to have my Oyster Court serviced by Rolex because it needed parts, and they replaced the dial. If they didn't do that, it would have cost less. So like I said, I'm not going to say that you're incorrect because I don't know who you're dealing with, but my experience with Rolex servicing my watches it's directly linked to parts and service. Parts and hours spent working on the watch, time and labor, and parts, like a car. But that's been my experience. Your mileage may vary. So we're at about 10 before the hour. If there are no other questions, we can go ahead and close out the episode. It's always wonderful talking to you all about these topics. And I think in the case of the timegrapher, it's definitely something, if you're a collector, you should, even if you only have one watch. If it's a mechanical watch, if it's a quartz watch, you don't need this. This is only for mechanical watches. Don't buy it and then put your quartz watch on it and go, oh, my quartz watch is broken. It's not designed to pick up quartz watches don't really make a noise. And I once put my Accutron in it as a joke, but it didn't get the time either. So take care. Oh, thank you, Ronan. Take care, all of you. Love you all. Have a fantastic week. And until next week, Take care. If you have any ideas for the show, send them to me. And please tell your friends to like and subscribe to the show. I appreciate it.